You're dead to me. That's what my son Daniel said loud enough for the waitress at Miller's Diner to stop pouring coffee. His words sliced through the clatter of forks and the soft hum of an old jukebox playing Sweet Caroline. The smell of burnt toast mixed with the sour sting of humiliation. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth just went dry and my hand trembled around the chipped mug. He didn't whisper it in anger. He announced it like a verdict, like a final sentence on a life he no longer wanted part of. "Mom, you're dead to me," he repeated, leaning back, his voice shaking not with sadness but with disgust. "You've ruined everything. You don't even belong in that house anymore." That house. The one where I'd raised him from a toddler, patched his jeans, and taught him how to tie his first tie before prom. The one with the oak tree out front that he used to climb. The one that in his mind was now his, not mine. Everyone in the diner turned to stare. A few people I recognized, neighbors, retirees, a couple from my church. No one spoke, but I could feel their pity, like a blanket I didn't ask for. I tried to say something gentle, something motherly to ease whatever storm had taken hold of him. "Danny," I whispered, "you don't mean that. Sit down. Let's—" He stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. "Don't Danny me. You think you can just play the sweet old lady after what you did? You embarrassed me. You made me look like a fool in front of Sarah's family." Sarah, his wife, my daughter-in-law. The woman who hadn't looked me in the eye since the wedding 2 years ago. She'd always had that polite smile, the kind that hides a blade behind it. "What did I do?" I asked, still keeping my voice low, steady. I didn't want a scene, but it was too late. We were already the scene. He snorted. "Don't pretend you don't know. The house, Mom. The house. You think I don't know what you've been doing? Talking to realtors, changing things behind my back?" A flush crept up my neck. He didn't know the truth. Not yet. He was guessing, lashing out. "I haven't done anything behind your back," I said softly. "The house is still the same." He slammed his palm on the table and the coffee rippled. "You're lying." "Sarah's brother checked the county records. The deed's still under your name. You promised us that place. You said it would be ours. There it was. The promise. The thing they'd been feeding on. I hadn't promised them anything. I'd said, someday, maybe. Someday when I was gone. Not while I was still breathing. But to Daniel and to Sarah, my continued existence had become an inconvenience. "I'm not dead yet," I said quietly. He leaned close, his breath thick with the bitterness of too many sleepless nights and whispered arguments. "Then maybe you should be." The diner went silent. Even the jukebox seemed to stop mid-song. A fork clattered somewhere and an old man at the counter muttered, "Easy, son." Daniel glared at him. "Stay out of this, old man." The stranger graybeard flannel jacket didn't move, just shook his head. "That's your mother. Watch your mouth." "I'll never forget that." The stranger's voice, calm but firm, cutting through my son's rage. He didn't know me, but for a moment, he stood up for me more than my own blood did. Daniel's face went red. He threw a few crumpled bills on the table. "You're not part of my life anymore. You'll regret this." Then he walked out, slamming the door so hard the little brass bell flew off its hook. The waitress, young maybe 20, came over, eyes wide. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I nodded, though my throat ached. "Yes, I've been better." She hesitated, then poured more coffee, even though I hadn't asked. "For what it's worth, he shouldn't talk to you like that. My mom and I fight too, but never like that." I managed a smile, brittle but real. "Thank you, sweetheart." When she walked away, I sat there staring at the untouched pancakes, now cold hard as rubber. Outside the window, I could see Daniel's truck peel out of the parking lot gravel, spraying like sparks. For a second, I thought he might stop, turn around, maybe remember that I was his mother. But he didn't. He was gone. And for the first time in 68 years, I felt hollow. I paid the bill, left a tip bigger than I could afford, and walked out into the late afternoon sun. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. The wind smelled faintly of rain and gasoline. Across the street, the real estate office glimmered behind glass, Hartman Realty, in blue cursive letters. Daniel thought I'd been talking to realtors. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had spoken to someone there, but not to sell the house, not the suburban one. The house he thought was the only thing I had. No, my real secret, the one I'd kept even from my closest friends, was written in a folder locked in my safe deposit box. A title deed, a will, and a lakefront property 3 hours north worth nearly twice what Daniel's greed was fighting over. That $3.5 million house wasn't on the county records, not under my name at least. I hadn't touched it since my husband passed, but I would soon. Because if my own son could tell me I was dead to him, then maybe it was time I let that version of me die and let the woman who owned both houses finally stand up. When I drove home that day, I didn't cry. Not yet. But I did start making a list, and at the very top underlined 3 times I wrote his name. I drove back to Maplewood, the little suburb I'd called home for almost 40 years. The streets were lined with those same maple trees my husband Richard used to admire every autumn, their red leaves spilling onto the driveways like fire. The neighborhood had changed, but the house at the corner of Willow and 5th still looked the same cream siding, blue shutters, a porch swing that creaked when the wind shifted. It wasn't a mansion, but it had soul. It had our story in every inch of paint. When I parked in the driveway, I sat there for a long time before going in. The silence in that car was heavier than any argument. I could still hear Daniel's words echoing, "You're dead to me," like a curse that refused to fade. Inside, the air was still. The faint smell of cedar and old books hung around the hallway. I passed the family photos that once made me proud, Daniel holding his first baseball bat. The 3 of us at Yellowstone. Richard in his suit smiling like he didn't know life would take him too soon. It's funny people think widows get used to loneliness. They don't, it just changes shape. When Richard died 8 years ago, Daniel was 34. He cried harder than I'd ever seen him cry. I remember thinking, he'll protect me now. I won't be alone. I was wrong. Grief changed him. Or maybe it revealed who he was underneath. The sweet boy who used to leave me sticky notes on the fridge saying, "Love you, Mom," became a man obsessed with what he thought was owed to him. It started small, a request for a loan when his business was struggling, then another, and another. Before I realized it, he owed me nearly $70,000. I never asked for it back. What mother would? But Sarah. She wasn't like that. From the moment they married, she treated me like an obstacle. I saw the way she looked around my house, assessing things, the furniture, the framed wedding photo, the china cabinet, as if she was mentally labeling everything with price tags. Once at dinner, she laughed and said, "One day this place will need a real update. Granite counters, new floors, maybe tear down that old porch." I remember Richard's voice in my head, then soft and certain, "Never let anyone treat your home like a project." That night I started sleeping lighter. I began noticing the little things, Sarah's comments about the will, Daniel's sudden urgency, whenever property taxes came up, the way they both avoided talking about their finances. I pretended not to see the cracks because love makes fools of us all. And yet, I wasn't as naive as they thought. I'd lived too long, seen too much. I'd paid every mortgage payment with a teacher's salary while Richard built his small carpentry business. When he died, there were no hidden debts, no chaos. He'd left everything in my name, everything, even the lake house. He'd bought it secretly, years before he got sick. One day, he'd said, "When we're too old to chase the world, we'll sit by the water and just breathe." We never got to do that. I discovered the deed a month after the funeral, tucked in his old toolbox behind a set of blueprints. The property had been paid off in full. A 3-bedroom house by Lake Shasta, quiet, surrounded by pine and glass water. Market value back then, $1.7 million. I kept it hidden, rented it out under a management company's name, and never told a soul. Daniel thought the suburban house was my only asset. He thought if he could guilt me, I'd cave transfer the deed, hand over control, fade into the background like every tired mother who gives up her last bit of independence. But what he didn't understand was that quiet doesn't mean weak. For decades, I'd been the one keeping everything together. When the furnace broke, it was me who called the repairman. When Richard got sick, it was me who sold my car to cover medical bills. When Daniel needed tuition money, I worked double shifts at the diner. That's right, the same diner where he humiliated me today. There's a certain irony in that, isn't there? Life comes full circle, sometimes cruelly, sometimes beautifully. As I made tea that evening, I sat by the window watching the sun sink behind the rooftops. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside me, something was shifting. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry deeply, quietly angry. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that plans. I took out a notebook from the drawer, the same one I'd used to keep bills and grocery lists, and started writing. Expenses, bank accounts, property details, the safe deposit box number, the name of the attorney who handled Richard's estate. I wrote everything down slowly, methodically, not because I was confused, but because I was preparing. By the time I finished, the tea had gone cold. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. On the counter, Daniel's old baseball gloves still sat in a box I never threw away. I traced the worn leather with my fingers. "You used to be my whole world," I whispered. "Now you're just a stranger, with my last name." That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't dream of reconciliation. I dreamed of water, the lake calm and endless, waiting for me. Maybe that was Richard's way of reminding me not everything we lose is gone forever. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I knew one thing for certain. Daniel had taken my peace, but he hadn't taken my power. Not yet. The following Sunday, the neighborhood was buzzing. My neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, had dropped by early that morning holding a basket of muffins and gossip in equal measure. "You're going to Daniel's barbecue today, right?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "He told my husband it's a family thing." "Sounds fancy." I forced a smile. "Yes, I'll be there." Truthfully, I'd thought about skipping it. After what happened at the diner, I wasn't sure I could face him. But a part of me, maybe the foolish, motherly part, hoped he might apologize. Maybe he'd had time to think. Maybe Sarah had talked sense into him. I spent the morning in quiet preparation. I ironed my pale blue dress, the one Richard had always liked. I even baked his favorite apple pie, though my hands shook as I crimped the crust. Old habits die hard. By noon, the suburban sun was bright and merciless. Daniel's house was only 10 minutes away, but I drove there like it was miles. His neighborhood was newer, larger, the kind of place where lawns looked professionally sculpted, and every house had matching mailboxes. It was Sarah's territory now, not mine. Cars lined the street. Laughter floated through the open gate as I parked across from the manicured hedges. I carried the pie carefully, its warmth seeping through the foil, and rang the doorbell. Sarah opened the door. Her smile was polite, polished cold. She looked like a magazine ad in her white sundress and diamond earrings. "Oh, you came," she said, her tone almost surprised. "I was invited," I said gently. Daniel said it was family. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes did. "Of course. Come in." Inside the house gleamed. Granite counters, leather couches, a chandelier that looked like something out of a catalog. I could almost hear Sarah's voice from years ago. Granite counters, new floors, maybe tear down that old porch. Guests filled the living room, Daniel's coworkers, Sarah's parents, a few distant cousins. The smell of grilled steak and perfume hung thick in the air. I spotted Daniel near the backyard doors laughing with Sarah's father, a man who'd never once addressed me by name. When he noticed me, Daniel's smile froze. His posture stiffened, but he didn't come over. Instead, he gestured vaguely toward the buffet table. "Food's out back, Mom. No hug, no warmth. Just instructions like I was a guest at my own family's gathering." I walked to the patio, setting the pie beside a stack of store-bought desserts. A few people greeted me politely, but others avoided eye contact. Whispers floated around, faint but sharp. "Didn't she lose the house?" "No, not yet. But I heard she's selling." "Really? Sarah said it's already theirs." I tried to steady my breathing. Sarah appeared beside me, glass of white wine in hand. "You made pie," she said lightly. "That's sweet." I told Daniel we didn't need more dessert, but he insisted. "You know how he is sentimental." "Sentimental," I repeated quietly, watching her take a sip. That's one word for it. She leaned closer. You know, it's probably time we start planning ahead. You're getting older and the house is a lot to maintain. Daniel worries about you. I'm sure he does, I said. Her lips curved. He's been working with a financial advisor. We might move in once things are finalized. It'll be easier for everyone. Finalized. The word settled in my chest like a stone. Before I could respond, Daniel clinked a glass from the porch steps. Everyone. He called out, his voice carrying over the chatter. Can I have your attention for a moment? The crowd quieted. I froze, still holding my empty plate. I just wanted to thank you all for coming, he began. It's been a big year for us. New business, new baby on the way. He paused for applause and hopefully a new home soon. Applause. Laughter. People cheered. I felt a flicker of pride for the grandchild I hadn't even met yet, but then his words twisted. As some of you know, he continued, my mom's been living alone in the old house since Dad passed. It's been hard for her and, well, he chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. She's finally agreed to sign the house over so we can take care of it. It's really for the best. My breath caught. My heart hammered in my ears. People turned to look at me, smiling, nodding, clapping politely. They thought this was my idea, my decision, my surrender, but I hadn't agreed to anything. Sarah smiled, her hand resting delicately on her belly. We're just so grateful, she said sweetly. Family means everything to us. My vision blurred for a second. The chatter swelled again, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I set my plate down and stepped forward. Daniel, I said quietly, but the tremor in my voice made everyone turn. What are you talking about? He froze. Mom, not now. No, I said louder. You told everyone I agreed to give you the house. That's not true. A ripple of murmurs moved through the guests. Sarah's smile faltered. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, he said, forcing a laugh, you must have misunderstood. I haven't misunderstood anything I said. You didn't ask me. You decided for me, in front of everyone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the baby monitor on the counter crackled, then went still. Sarah's father cleared his throat awkwardly. Maybe this isn't the time. Oh, I think it's exactly the time, I said, my voice breaking but steadying again. You want everyone to believe you're a devoted son taking care of his poor old mother. But you're not doing this for me, Daniel. You're doing it for the house, for money, for the illusion of control. Daniel's face flushed red. That's enough, Mom. No, I whispered. Not anymore. And with that, I picked up my purse, left the untouched pie on the table, and walked out past the murmurs, past the cameras, recording for Instagram stories, past the son who just humiliated me in front of 100 people. When I reached the car, my hands were shaking. The laughter inside the house carried faintly through the wind. But I didn't cry this time either. Instead, I looked at the horizon, at the road leading north. I knew where I was going, Lake Shasta. It was time to visit the house Daniel didn't know existed. By Monday morning, the story had already made its way around Maplewood. People at the church whispered. The cashier at the grocery store smiled too kindly, the way people do when they've heard something ugly but don't want to say it out loud. I kept my head high anyway. 68 years had taught me that dignity was something no one could take unless you handed it to them. But that week, Daniel tried. He came by unannounced on Wednesday evening. The doorbell rang just as I was taking banana bread out of the oven. When I opened the door, he was standing there in a suit, a manila folder in hand. His face looked tight, like he'd practiced something in front of a mirror. "Can I come in?" he asked. "You're already here," I said, moving aside. He stepped into the living room and looked around. His eyes skimmed the old photos, the furniture, the rug Richard and I bought from a thrift shop in 1989. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was calculation. He was mentally inventorying what he believed was his future property. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "I came to settle this." "Settle what?" He placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were printed documents, legal-looking papers, highlighted sections, sticky notes. Sarah and I talked to an attorney. He said it's best if we transfer ownership now so everything's easier later. You'll still live here as long as you need, of course. Nothing changes. He slid a pen across the table like it was a peace offering. My chest felt cold. "So, you came here to make me sign away my home." His tone softened, rehearsed. "It's not like that, Mom. You'll always have a place here. It's just the taxes, the insurance, it's too much for you alone." I stared at him. "You think I can't manage my own house? I think you're 70. Next year in 68, I corrected. And it's time to make things practical." There was no anger in his voice, just that cold efficiency people use when they've already decided something. I closed the folder and pushed it back. "Daniel, this house isn't yours to take. Your father built it for us. It's the only thing I have left of him." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand, Mom. Sarah's family." "Ah," I interrupted. "There it is, Sarah's family." He didn't deny it. He just stood there, shoulders tense, eyes hard. "She thinks you should have it now," I said. "Does she also think I should disappear quietly, maybe into one of those nursing homes on the edge of town?" His silence told me everything. Something in me cracked, then not like glass shattering, but like a door unlocking after years of being sealed shut. I stood up slowly, walked to the bookshelf, and took down a framed photo of him and Richard fishing at Lake Erie. Daniel was 10, his arm around his father, both of them grinning. I held it up between us. "Do you remember this?" He hesitated. "Of course I do. Your father loved you more than anything, but if he saw what you've become, he'd be ashamed." He flinched. "Don't do that. Don't make me the bad guy. I'm trying to help." "Help yourself," I said quietly. "That's what you mean." He took a deep breath, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you won't do it willingly, Mom, I'll have to handle it another way." Sarah's uncle works with estate law. He said there are legal options. "Legal options?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Power of attorney, guardianship, something that makes sure you're not taken advantage of by you," I asked sharply. That made him pause. For the first time, I saw guilt flicker behind his anger, but he buried it quickly. "I don't want this to get ugly. You raised me better than that." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "I raised you to know right from wrong. You made your own choice to forget it." He stared at me, waiting for me to fold. I didn't. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and stormed toward the door. But before leaving, he turned and said the line that would echo for days after, "You've got maybe a few months before you can't keep up anymore. Then you'll have to come to me." When the door slammed, the photo slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I didn't clean it right away. I just stood there staring at the pieces, the broken glass reflecting both of us, mother and son fractured beyond repair. Later that evening, as I swept the shards into a dustpan, the phone rang. It was Sarah. "I hope you'll do the right thing," she said. Her tone was syrupy, fake concern dripping through the receiver. "It's only fair, after all Daniel's done for you." I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. "Fair," I said. "You wouldn't know fair if it paid your mortgage." She went silent, then hung up. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, staring at the stack of documents Daniel had left behind. I could still smell his cologne on the paper. For a moment, I almost tore them up. But then I thought better of it. I placed them neatly in a drawer instead. Because if he wanted a fight, I'd need evidence. Before bed, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was crisp, the stars faint behind city lights. Across the street, Mr. Callahan waved as he watered his lawn. "Everything okay, Margaret?" he called. I hesitated, then smiled. "Just fine," I said. "Everything's about to get interesting." Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and opened Richard's old ledger, the one he'd used to record payments, contracts, repairs. And there, tucked between two yellowed pages, was something I'd almost forgotten, a letter from our lawyer dated 12 years ago confirming the title transfer on the lakefront property. Not just confirming it, reaffirming it under a trust Richard created in my name alone. A chill ran down my spine. I'd always known it was there, but seeing the proof again made my heart steady. I whispered to the empty room, "Let them try," because Daniel thought he could humiliate me in front of everyone. But what he didn't know was that the woman he'd declared dead still had one more life to live, one with keys he didn't even know existed. The letter came on a Friday morning. It was the kind of day that smelled like rain before it started heavy air, the sky swollen with gray. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when I heard the knock. Not the sharp, friendly tap of a neighbor, but the firm, professional rhythm of someone who'd come to deliver bad news. When I opened the door, a man in a navy suit handed me a large envelope. "Mrs. Caldwell," he asked. "Yes." He gave a quick nod. "You've been served." The words hit harder than they should have. Served. Not greeted, not spoken to. Served. Like I was the defendant in some invisible trial I hadn't agreed to. By the time I shut the door, my hands were trembling. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the documents as though they might vanish if I blinked. The first line read, "Petition for temporary guardianship and property transfer authorization." Daniel's name was listed as the petitioner. I read it twice, my vision blurring. My son was trying to have me declared incompetent. The paperwork claimed I was no longer able to manage financial responsibilities due to age-related decline. Attached were statements, lies about missed payments, forgotten bills, neglect, all fabricated, every single one. Sarah's name appeared as a supporting witness. She'd even written a note in her tidy cursive, "Margaret has become increasingly forgetful. We worry about her safety and finances." Forgetful, I could still remember every time she'd rolled her eyes at me, every insult she'd slipped behind a smile. I sat there for an hour, frozen. The coffee went cold. The rain finally started tapping softly against the window. It wasn't just paperwork, it was betrayal in print. Later that day, I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "Mom," he said, sounding tired, annoyed. "I was going to talk to you about it. You filed for guardianship," I said flatly. He sighed. "You're overreacting. It's just temporary. The lawyer said it's a formality, a way to protect everyone. You'll still live there. Protect everyone." My voice shook. "From what, Daniel? From your mother owning her own home?" Silence. Then he said it, the sentence that broke whatever piece of me was still holding on. "Sarah's pregnant mom. We need stability. The house is too big for you and we can't keep waiting forever." There it was. The we. It was never him. It was always them. I closed my eyes, forcing the tears back. "Your father used to say greed doesn't start with wanting more. It starts with believing you deserve what someone else has," he scoffed. "You're twisting this into something ugly. We're family. Family doesn't do this. Family takes care of each other," he snapped. "No," I whispered. "Family remembers who took care of them first." I hung up before he could answer. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. That night, I sat in the living room with every light off. The sound of rain against the roof was steady, almost soothing. I thought about the years I'd spent building this home, painting the nursery, cooking dinners, patching holes in the drywall when Daniel tried to fix things and made them worse. Every wall held a memory, and now my own son wanted to sign it away. Around 9 p.m., there was another knock. When I opened the door, it was Mr. Callahan from across the street. "Saw a car stop by earlier," he said. "Everything all right?" He must have noticed my face because he frowned. "You look pale, Margaret. Want me to stay a bit?" I nodded. For the first time in days, I let someone else in. He sat at the kitchen table while I explained everything: the petition, the lies, the humiliation. When I finished, he whistled softly and leaned back. "That's low. Real low." He glanced toward the window, then back at me. "Do you have anyone on your side?" "A lawyer?" I hesitated, then remembered Richard's old attorney, Thomas Reynolds. He'd handled the lake house paperwork years ago. I hadn't spoken to him in a decade, but maybe he could help. Maybe I said quietly, "I have something they don't know about." Mr. Callahan gave a small, approving nod. "Good. Don't tell them yet. People like that, they underestimate you until it's too late." After he left, I found the key to my safe deposit box and placed it in my pocket. I hadn't opened that box since Richard's funeral, but I knew what was inside the trust deed for the Lake Shasta property, the notarized papers in my name alone, and a letter from Richard sealed with his initials. The next morning, I drove to the downtown bank. The vault smelled like metal and quiet secrets. When the clerk brought out the box, my hands were steady for the first time all week. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. The papers were crisp, the signatures clear, and the letter, God, that letter. It was addressed to me in Richard's neat handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you've had to fight for something we built together. Don't let anyone, especially our own, make you feel small for protecting it. The house, the lake, the life, they're yours until you decide otherwise. No one else's. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried quietly, not from weakness, but from the weight of love that still lingered after death. When I walked out of the bank, the world felt sharper, clearer. Daniel and Sarah had started a war over something they didn't understand. They thought money and property were power. But power isn't what you own. It's what you know. And I knew something they didn't. The suburban house wasn't the crown jewel. The lakefront estate, the $3.5 million one was, and it was protected under a trust they could never touch. By the time I got home, a notice was taped to my front door. Court date scheduled 2 weeks. I pulled it off, folded it neatly, and tucked it inside Richard's ledger. Then I looked around the living room at the photos and the quiet and the faint smell of banana bread still lingering from days ago. They could try to take my house. They could try to take my name, but they'd never take my story, and I was just getting ready to tell it. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in my bones. I sat in bed with the old photo album open across my lap, pages filled with the life I had built and the people who had slowly walked away from it. The first photo was of Richard and me in 1978, standing outside the small diner where we'd met. He was in a grease-stained apron. I was wearing a red uniform and a smile I didn't know I had anymore. Back then, all we had was a rusted Chevy, 2 paychecks that never stretched far enough, and a promise. We'll build something of our own even if it takes a lifetime. And we did. We worked for 40 years straight. Richard opened a carpentry shop in town. I taught 3rd grade. We never traveled, never splurged. Every extra dollar went into savings or the mortgage. When other couples bought boats or vacations, we patched the roof and bought used furniture. It wasn't glamour, but it was steady. Daniel came along late. I was 38, Richard 40. He was our miracle. I remember the smell of baby powder and the nights spent rocking him under the hum of the ceiling fan. He had his father's eyes, that same spark of mischief. He used to tell everyone my mom's the strongest woman in the world. Funny how a sentence can haunt you years later. When Richard got sick, everything changed. I was 59 when the doctors said the word terminal. 6 months, maybe a year. I quit my job to take care of him full time. Our savings drained faster than I could count. Hospital bills, medications, in-home care. It added up to nearly $280,000 before it was over. Daniel visited when he could, but his own life was chaotic. Then a failing business, a new girlfriend, debt piling up. I never blamed him. I told myself he was just overwhelmed. The night Richard died, he held my hand and whispered, "Promise me one thing, Maggie, don't let them take what we worked for." I didn't understand what he meant until now. After the funeral, I went through his workshop trying to find anything that still smelled like him, sawdust, coffee oil. That's when I found the small blue box under his workbench. Inside was the deed to the lakefront house and a note in his handwriting, "Not everything we own needs to be shown. Some things are meant to protect you when I no longer can." I locked that box away and never spoke of it again. Life after him was a long stretch of quiet, days filled with bills, errands, grocery store, small talk. I got used to the silence, even learned to like it sometimes. I cooked for one, watched old movies, fed the stray cat that came by every morning. But the loneliness, that was the part no one tells you about. The kind that sneaks in while you're folding laundry or pouring a single cup of coffee instead of 2. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It just stays. Maybe that's why I tolerated Daniel's distance for so long, even when he started calling only when he needed money. Even when Sarah stopped inviting me to birthdays. I convinced myself it was just how modern families worked, everyone busy, everyone tired. But the truth, I was scared. Scared of losing what little connection I had left. When he shouted at me in that diner, something inside me shattered, but something else finally woke up. That night, as I turned another page in the photo album, I found one that made me pause. It was Daniel at 16 standing in front of his first car, a used Honda we'd bought after saving for months. He'd been furious that it wasn't new. I'd never forgotten his words. Everyone else's parents care about appearances. You only care about money. Money. That's all it ever came down to, wasn't it? Not love, not respect, money. The next morning, I made myself breakfast, like always. Oatmeal, black coffee, one slice of toast. But everything tasted different. The fear had started to fade, replaced by something heavier, older. Resolve. I walked to the study and opened the drawer with his papers again. Then I found the old flip phone Richard had left in one of his toolboxes, the one I'd never thrown away. When I turned it on, there was one number saved under Tom R. Thomas Reynolds. I stared at the name for a long moment before dialing. He answered on the third ring. Reynolds' law office. Thomas, I said, my voice trembling just slightly. This is Margaret Caldwell. You handled my husband's estate years ago. A pause. Then a warm, steady voice, Margaret. My God, it's been ages. How are you? Not well, I said. I think my son is trying to take my house. He didn't hesitate. Come in tomorrow morning. We'll talk. When I hung up, I felt a strange calm. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't reacting, I was preparing. That evening I went for a walk. The sky was soft pink, the air smelling faintly of cut grass and barbecue from distant porches. As I passed Miller's Diner, the same place where Daniel had shouted those cruel words, the waitress who'd seen it all stepped outside to empty the trash. Mrs. Caldwell, she said quietly, I'm sorry for what happened that day. I smiled faintly. You don't need to apologize for someone else's manners. She hesitated. Still, my granddad used to say, the quieter the storm, the stronger the lightning. I chuckled softly. That's good advice. As I walked home under the streetlights, I repeated that line in my head. The quieter the storm, the stronger the lightning. Maybe that was what I was. Now a quiet storm no one saw coming. By the time I reached my porch, I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow, I'd go to Thomas. I'd bring every paper, every document, every memory Richard left behind, and I'd stop being the mother they could bully. Because once a woman like me decides to stand up, she doesn't sit back down. Thomas Reynolds hadn't changed much in 10 years. His hair was grayer, his glasses thicker, but his voice still carried that calm, deliberate confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime protecting other people's battles. When I stepped into his office the next morning, the smell of leather and paper hit me, the kind that instantly makes you feel small but safe. He stood up as soon as he saw me. Margaret, he said warmly, you look exactly the same. I laughed softly. Flattery doesn't work on widows, Tom. He smiled. Then let's skip to the truth. We sat down across from each other. I placed the folder on his desk, the one from my safe deposit box, and unfolded the papers one by one. His eyes scanned the documents, and I could almost see the gears turning in his mind. When he reached the last page, he leaned back in his chair. Well, this changes everything. How bad is it? I asked quietly. Bad for them, he said. Good for you. He pointed to the trust document, a notarized file dated 15 years ago, transferring ownership of both properties, the suburban home and the Lake Shasta house, into a private family trust. My name was the sole trustee. But that wasn't the part that caught his attention. Do you see this clause here? He said, tapping his pen against a paragraph highlighted in faded yellow. I leaned closer. No property may be transferred, sold, or inherited without the trustee's living consent. He nodded. Meaning even after your death, your written instructions control who gets what. Not the court, not your son, you. I sat back stunned. So, even if they try to take me to court, they can't, he said. The court can't override a private trust, especially not one reaffirmed twice as this was. See here, Richard re-signed it before his surgery. Everything's airtight. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Relief and disbelief tangled together in my chest. I'd been living in fear of losing everything, not realizing that Richard had already made sure that could never happen. Thomas smiled gently. He was a smart man, Margaret. He must have known something like this could happen. My throat tightened. He did, I whispered. He told me not to let them take what we built. I told Thomas everything, the barbecue, the public humiliation, the guardianship petition. His expression darkened. That's emotional abuse, plain and simple, he said. But we won't fight it emotionally. We'll fight it legally. He opened a new folder and began drafting a response. First, we'll file a motion to dismiss the guardianship on grounds of fraud and defamation. Then we'll send a certified notice to their attorney informing them that all property assets fall under an irrevocable trust. They'll back off once they realize they can't touch a cent." He paused, then added, "But if you want to make a statement, we can do more than just defend. We can expose what they tried to do." I blinked. "Expose?" He nodded. "You said there were witnesses. People who saw how your son spoke to you, humiliated you in public, yes. At the diner, at the barbecue, half the neighborhood." "Good," he said. "If this goes public, their reputation will take a hit before the court even sees the papers." I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted revenge or simply peace. But as I thought of Daniel's smirk that day, the whispers, Sarah's smug smile, something inside me hardened. "Do it," I said. "All of it." When I left Thomas's office, the morning sun was blinding. The air smelled different, cleaner somehow. I hadn't felt that light in years. On the way home, I stopped at Miller's Diner. The same waitress, the kind one with freckles, was there wiping down tables. She looked up and smiled cautiously. "Mrs. Caldwell, how are you holding up?" I smiled back. "Better than I look." I ordered a slice of pie and sat by the window watching the world go by. Then I noticed something on the corner of the table, an old man's wallet, forgotten beside a napkin holder. I looked around and saw him the same man who'd defended me that day Daniel yelled. He was by the door arguing quietly with the cashier, probably realizing he'd lost it. "Sir," I called. "You left this." He turned eyes wide and his face softened with recognition. "You," he said, smiling. "The lady from the showdown." I chuckled. That's one way to describe it. He took the wallet, nodding gratefully. "You handled yourself better than most would have." "I'm learning," I said. He hesitated, then added, "You remind me of my sister. Her kids tried to pull something similar after her stroke. She won, though, said, 'If they want to fight, let them meet me in court where God can hear every word.'" I laughed a real laugh this time. "Your sister sounds like my kind of woman. She'd like you," he said, tipping his cap. "And she'd tell you this, keep every receipt, every word, every date. Truth doesn't shout, but it always shows up." When he left, I sat there for a while, the pie untouched. Then I pulled out a small notebook from my purse and started writing dates, events, witnesses, conversations. The list grew longer by the minute. That night, as I organized the files on the dining table, I noticed something odd inside one of the trust folders, a thin, sealed envelope I'd never opened before. It was tucked behind the legal documents marked in Richard's handwriting, "For when you doubt yourself." My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single photo, me and Daniel on the porch years ago, laughing, his head on my shoulder. Behind it was a note written in Richard's familiar steady scrawl, "He'll lose his way before he finds it again. Don't save him too early. Sometimes the fall is the lesson." I pressed the note against my heart and cried, not out of sadness, but something deeper, understanding. Richard had known our son's weakness. He'd seen it coming, and somehow he'd prepared me for this exact moment. The next morning I called Thomas. "Let's move forward," I said, but not quietly. He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes. They wanted to make a show out of my humiliation. Now it's time they see what real power looks like, the kind that doesn't need to scream." When I hung up, I looked out the window at the suburban street I'd lived on for 40 years. For the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a stage. And the next act was mine. The next 2 weeks moved like clockwork, quiet, precise, deliberate. From the outside, I probably looked like any other old woman going about her day. I still watered my plants every morning, still waved at the mailman, still smiled politely at Mrs. Callahan when she shouted from across the street. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't the frail widow my son thought I was. I was a woman gathering ammunition. Thomas called every other day. "Stay calm, Margaret," he kept reminding me. "They'll try to provoke you. Don't take the bait." He was right, because Daniel and Sarah did come back this time pretending to make peace. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw their SUV pull into the driveway. My heart pounded, but I didn't move. I simply turned off the kettle, straightened the kitchen towel, and waited for the inevitable knock. Sarah was the first to speak when I opened the door. Her voice was sugary, her eyes sharp. "Hi, Mom. We brought lunch." Behind her, Daniel held a box from a local deli. We thought we could talk things through. No lawyers, just family. I wanted to laugh. Just family, the same people who'd tried to strip me of my rights a week ago. Still, I stepped aside. "Come in," I said, quietly. They looked around as they entered, scanning the room like vultures circling a carcass. Daniel's eyes lingered on the antique clock, then the crystal cabinet. Sarah noticed the envelope on the counter, the one from the lawyer, and I could see the flicker of curiosity she tried to hide. We sat down at the dining table. Daniel unpacked sandwiches while Sarah poured iced tea, her every movement calculated. So Daniel began. We might have rushed things. The guardianship, I mean. It was Sarah's idea. We just wanted to protect you. Sarah smiled sweetly. "We didn't realize how much this upset you, Mom. We're sorry." I took a slow sip of tea. "You're sorry you got caught." That froze them both. Sarah laughed lightly, forced. "That's not fair." "No, dear." I interrupted, my tone soft but razor sharp. "What's not fair is filing court papers behind my back while smiling in my face." Daniel's jaw clenched. "We just want what's best for everyone." "For everyone or for you?" I asked. His eyes flashed. "You've got to stop acting like we're villains. You're sitting on property worth almost $2 million while we're drowning in bills. What do you need all that space for? You live alone." "Maybe I like the quiet," I said. Sarah leaned forward. "You can keep the quiet. We just need security. Think about your grandchild. Don't you want to help?" There it was. Guilt, their favorite weapon. I met her gaze evenly. Your child deserves parents who earn their own home, not ones who steal it from a 70-year-old woman. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "You're unbelievable." "No," I said calmly. "I'm awake." Before they could speak again, I reached for a small black recorder sitting beside my cup. I clicked it off. Silence. Daniel stared at it. "What's that proof?" I said, sliding it into my pocket. "You just confirmed everything I needed to know, that you tried to take what wasn't yours and that you did it for greed, not love." Sarah's face went pale. "You recorded us. I record everything now," I said. "You taught me to." For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You've lost it." Maybe I said softly, but the court won't think so. He froze. "What do you mean?" I met his eyes. "You'll find out soon enough. Your lawyer will get a call by Monday." He opened his mouth to argue, but I stood. "Lunch is over. Please see yourselves out." They hesitated, but finally turned and left. The door slammed harder than necessary, just like the last time. I waited until their car disappeared before calling Thomas. "They came," I said. "And I got everything." He chuckled. "Good. We'll file the motion Monday morning. Their own words will bury them." That night, I sat by the window watching headlights flash across the dark street. I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in years, I felt control, quiet, patient, absolute control. But something else happened that week, something I didn't expect. A letter arrived in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one typed sentence. "They're trying to sell the house before the hearing." I stared at it for a full minute, heart pounding. There was no signature, but I had a suspicion, maybe a neighbor, maybe one of Sarah's acquaintances who'd seen too much. I called Thomas immediately. "They're planning to sell before the court date." He swore under his breath. "That's illegal without your signature, but they might be forging documents. I'll handle it. Don't confront them directly." But I already knew I would. That night, I drove past Daniel's neighborhood. Their lights were on, laughter spilling from inside. Through the window, I could see them sitting with Sarah's parents and another man, probably a realtor. They were planning my erasure in real time. I parked a block away and sat in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to storm in to shout, to show them the trust papers right then and there. But Richard's voice echoed in my mind. "Don't save him too early. Sometimes the fall is the lesson." So I waited. When I got home, I opened the envelope from the trust, again rereading every clause until I found something I'd missed before a sub-file titled Property Management Authorization. Inside it was a document signed by both Richard and Thomas, giving me full legal power to act on behalf of the trust in the event of fraud. It included one specific instruction. In the event of attempted unlawful sale transfer or guardianship, immediate ownership of all assets will transfer to the secondary property, Lake Shasta Estate, under the trustee's control. My breath caught. That meant if Daniel tried to sell this suburban house illegally, he'd automatically forfeit both homes. A quiet smile crept across my face. They thought they were taking everything, but every signature they forged would only tighten the noose they'd tied for themselves. I folded the papers neatly, placed them back in the folder, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, I would drive north to Lake Shasta and stand inside the house that still carried Richard's scent, the one my son didn't even know existed, because the time for quiet defense was over. The reckoning had begun. The courthouse smelled like old paper floor wax and nerves. When I arrived that morning, the October air was cool enough to sting my cheeks. I wore Richard's old gray coat, the one with the worn elbows, and carried my folder tucked neatly under my arm. No jewelry, no makeup, just calm. Quiet was my armor. Thomas met me at the steps. "You ready, Margaret?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. He smiled faintly. "Good. They don't know what's coming." Inside the courtroom buzzed with low chatter. Sarah sat beside Daniel in the front row, perfectly composed in her white blouse, a picture of fragile innocence. Daniel looked smug, as if he were about to close a business deal rather than gut his mother's life. Behind them sat Sarah's parents, arms folded, faces set in judgment. When they saw me, Sarah gave a small wave, the kind you give a neighbor, you pity. Daniel didn't even look up. The bailiff called for order, and everyone stood as Judge McKinley, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, took her seat. "Case number 45217, Caldwell versus Caldwell," she said briskly. "Petition for temporary guardianship and property transfer authorization." I took a slow breath. Guardianship. The word tasted bitter. Daniel's attorney, a slick man in a navy suit, stood first. "Your Honor, my client's mother has exhibited signs of cognitive decline, financial mismanagement, and erratic behavior. This petition seeks only to protect her assets and well-being." "Understood," said the judge. "Proceed." He gestured toward me. "We have statements from Mrs. Caldwell's daughter-in-law, Sarah Caldwell, and several family acquaintances." Sarah stood, placing a delicate hand over her stomach like a movie actress. "Your Honor, I love Margaret dearly. But lately, she's been confused, forgetting conversations, misplacing bills. We just want what's best for her." Her voice trembled, perfectly rehearsed. I could almost admire the performance if it hadn't been about me. The lawyer nodded sympathetically. "We also have evidence that Mrs. Caldwell attempted to contact multiple real estate agents about selling her home, but then refused to follow through. This inconsistency supports our claim that she may not fully understand her own finances." That part almost made me laugh. I'd contacted one realtor not to sell, but to assess the property's insurance value. But to them, every ordinary act was another brick in the wall of their lie. When it was Thomas's turn, he stood slowly adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mrs. Caldwell is not only of sound mind, but has been the target of deliberate coercion and financial manipulation by her son and daughter-in-law." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Thomas continued, his voice steady. "We have recordings, documentation, and a legal trust established 15 years ago by her late husband, Richard Caldwell. This trust renders the petitioner's claim invalid." Daniel's lawyer scoffed. "We haven't seen any such trust." "You will?" Thomas said, his tone dry as dust. The judge gestured. "Proceed." Thomas opened the folder carefully, sliding out the documents, the trust papers, the notarized signatures, the clause Richard had written himself. He handed copies to the judge and opposing counsel. The lawyer flipped through them, his face tightening by the second. "Your Honor, this can't be—" "It can't," Thomas interrupted. "And it is. You'll notice Section 7C clearly stating that no property may be sold, transferred, or inherited without the trustee's living consent. The trustee." Your Honor is my client. Judge McKinley leaned forward, reading the document line by line. This appears legitimate. Notarized twice with signatures from 2 witnesses. Who are the witnesses? Richard Caldwell and myself, Thomas said. And one other, the bank's legal notary. The judge looked up. Is this true? Mrs. Caldwell? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. My husband prepared it before he passed. He wanted to make sure I'd never lose what we worked for. Daniel's face went pale. You're lying. You never told me about this. I turned to him, calm as ever. You never asked. The judge banged her gavel. Order. Thomas continued unshaken. Additionally, Your Honor, we have audio recordings of a conversation in which the petitioners admit their intent to secure this house under false pretenses, specifically mentioning the value of the property and their financial difficulties. He pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the courtroom clear and ugly. You're sitting on property worth almost $2 million while we're drowning in bills. What do you need all that space for? You live alone. Then my voice, calm, quiet, devastating. Maybe I like the quiet. A few people in the courtroom actually gasped. Sarah's father muttered something under his breath. The judge's expression hardened. That will be enough. For the first time, Daniel looked uncertain. He leaned towards Sarah, whispering harshly. She tried to shush him, but her hands trembled. The judge turned back to me. Mrs. Caldwell, I see no evidence of mental decline or incompetence. On the contrary, you appear remarkably composed and organized. This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this case for review on possible elder financial abuse. Daniel shot up. What? You can't sit down. The judge snapped. Sarah covered her mouth, tears welling, whether from fear or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Thomas gathered our papers calmly. Thank you, Your Honor. But before we could leave, the judge spoke again. Mrs. Caldwell, if I may, you're lucky. Your husband had the foresight to protect you. Too many people your age aren't so fortunate. I smiled faintly. Luck had nothing to do with it, Your Honor. He just knew our son. A few people chuckled quietly. The sound felt like air after a long dive underwater. As we walked out of the courtroom, Daniel called after me. Mom, wait, I turned to him. You wanted me to be dead to you, remember? Maybe now you can live with the consequences. He flinched like I'd struck him. Outside, the air felt cleaner, sharper. Thomas exhaled beside me. That went even better than I expected. But I didn't answer right away. My hands were steady, but my heart ached. Because as much as I'd won, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief. Not the kind you cry through, but the kind that settles deep, like frost, because there's no courtroom ruling that can restore a bond once it's been shattered for greed. As we reached the car, Thomas asked softly, You all right? I will be, I said. I just need to visit somewhere first. He nodded, understanding instantly. Lake Shasta. Yes, I said. It's time to go home. The lake was still when I arrived, so still it looked like a mirror reflecting the sky. It had been more than 15 years since I'd last set foot on the Shasta property. The drive there took 5 hours, winding through pine forests and narrow roads lined with silence. I rolled down the window halfway just to smell the water, sharp, clean, and cold like memory itself. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. The house stood beyond, quiet and proud, exactly as Richard had left it. Cedar siding wraparound porch windows that caught the sun like glass eyes watching over the lake. For a long moment, I just stood there. I thought of him sanding the banister by hand, laughing about retirement, saying, One day, Maggie, this'll be the only place we'll need. Now it was the only place I had. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the faint smell of pine and dust. Everything was just as we'd left it, the plaid couch, the wooden shelves, the photograph of us fishing that summer before his diagnosis. But something new caught my eye, an envelope on the kitchen counter. My name was written in Richard's handwriting, faded but unmistakable. My heart thudded as I tore it open. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before his death. If you're reading this, it means you've come back to the lake house. Good. That means you're ready to stop surviving and start living again. I set things up so you'd always have a choice, not just security, but freedom. This house is more than property. It's leverage. The The kind that can't be taken, can't be sold, can't be stolen. I left something here for you in the old tackle box. Use it when you need it most. And Maggie, if Daniel ever forgets who he is, remind him. Not with anger, with truth. The kind that doesn't need shouting to be heard. I wiped my eyes and opened the hall closet where the tackle box sat dusty and untouched for over a decade. Inside were fishing lures, a rusted pocket knife, and beneath them a small flash drive. When I plugged it into my laptop, the screen came alive with files. Bank statements, property titles, old business documents, and one folder labeled Caldwell Timber Company. My jaw tightened. Richard had sold his carpentry business years before he passed, but he never told me to whom. Inside that folder were contracts showing that he hadn't sold it outright. He'd leased it under a holding company, one still active, still collecting profits. And the owner listed on every renewal form was me. The total value, $3.5 million. I sat back stunned. For years, Daniel had assumed my only assets were the suburban house and my pension. He had no idea that his father had left behind an entire business empire under my name, one that had quietly grown while he was too busy chasing get-rich schemes. I laughed through tears, shaking my head. Oh, Richard, you brilliant man. I spent the night there curled under a quilt listening to the water lap against the shore. For the first time in months, I slept without fear. The next morning, I woke to the crunch of tires on gravel. Through the window, I saw Daniel's truck. He stepped out wearing the same suit he'd worn to court, his face pale and desperate. I wasn't surprised. News travels fast when you lose everything. He stood by the porch steps looking at the house like he was seeing a ghost. "Mom," he said finally, "we need to talk." I opened the door. "Do we?" He exhaled shakily. "Look, I messed up." "Okay," I panicked. Sarah pushed me, her parents. "Stop," I said. My voice calm but cold. "You made choices, Daniel. Don't bury them under excuses." He looked down, his hands trembling. I didn't know about this place. Or the trust. You never told me. You never asked," I said again. He stared at the lake. "How long have you had this? It's worth, don't I?" Warned softly. "Don't say the number. Don't make it about money again." He swallowed hard. "You think I only care about money, I know you do," I said. "That's what this whole mess was about. You wanted control, not family." He winced, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy who used to run barefoot on our lawn chasing fireflies. Not the man who'd yelled at me in a diner, but the frightened child who'd lost his father too soon. He sank onto the porch steps, head in his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I said quietly. "You humiliated me. You tried to take everything your father and I worked for. You called me dead." His shoulders shook. "I know." The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of water. Then I said something I didn't plan to. "Do you know why your father bought this place?" He shook his head. "Because he didn't trust himself to stay away from work," I said, smiling faintly. "He wanted somewhere that reminded him why he worked in the first place, not for money, not for the business, but for us. For you." He looked up, eyes red. "And I ruined that." I shook my head. "No, Daniel, you can't ruin something you never understood." He stood slowly. "So what now?" "You'll cut me out completely." I looked toward the water, the sunlight flickering on the surface. "No, your father believed in redemption, so do I. But you won't find it through inheritance or apologies whispered too late." He frowned. "Then how?" "By earning it," I said. "Starting from zero. I've already spoken to Thomas. The court's notified the authorities about the petition fraud. You'll likely face an investigation, and so will Sarah." He blanched. "Mom," "No," I interrupted softly. "This isn't punishment, it's consequence. You thought I was weak. You thought you could take my house, my dignity, my name. But what you never realized is that everything you were fighting for was already mine legally, morally, and spiritually." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The weight of it all settled on his face. After a long silence, I said, "There's one more thing." I handed him the flash drive. "Your father left this for me. It's proof of the company's profits. You're not part of it, not yet. But if you decide to become the man he hoped you'd be, maybe one day you will be." He took it hesitantly. his fingers brushing mine. "Why would you trust me after everything?" "Because your father would have," I said, "and because mercy isn't weakness." Tears welled in his eyes. "I don't deserve it. Not yet," I said gently. "But that's the beauty of redemption. No one ever does." He stood there for a long time staring at the water before finally nodding. "I'll try, Mom." "I know," I said. "Now go home to your wife. Tell her the truth. All of it." When he left, the gravel crunched under his tires until it faded into nothing but wind. I watched the ripples on the lake and felt something lift from my chest. The anger, the sorrow, all of it dissolving into the water like salt. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was free. 2 weeks after the confrontation at Lake Shasta, autumn finally reached Maplewood. The air turned crisp, the trees bled gold, and the porch swing creaked like it remembered laughter. For the first time in months, I could walk past my window without feeling the weight of that house like a chain. But peace never arrives quietly. It walks in through small moments, unexpected phone calls, letters in official envelopes, strangers saying, "I saw what they did to you, and I'm glad you fought back." The first call came from Thomas. "Margaret," he said, voice brimming with restrained satisfaction. "You might want to sit down." "I am." Sarah's father withdrew his financial backing from Daniel's company this morning. Apparently, he didn't appreciate finding his daughter's name in a pending investigation for elder financial coercion. I smiled faintly. "Poetic." "There's more," he said. "The county dropped their petition against you, of course, but they've launched an audit into the signatures your son's lawyer used on those forged sale documents. Turns out one of the notaries admitted they were pressured into it." I said nothing for a moment, letting the information settle. "Don't feel guilty," Thomas added. "They dug that hole themselves." "Guilt isn't what I feel," I said quietly. "Relief, maybe. Or closure." He hesitated, then said, "I'll handle the rest." "You've done enough, Margaret. It's time you rest." But resting had never been easy for me, not when there was still work to do. The next day, I decided to visit the diner. Miller's had become something of a refuge, the only place where strangers treated me like a person instead of a headline. As soon as I walked in, the waitress, Annie, grinned. "Mrs. Caldwell, haven't seen you in a while. You look lighter." "I suppose I am," I said, sliding into my usual booth. I let go of some heavy things. She poured coffee. "Good for you. My granddad says sometimes you gotta bury the hurt before it buries you." I smiled at that, then noticed something at the counter, a local newspaper folded in half. The headline caught my eye. "Local business under investigation for fraudulent estate claims." The photo below was of Daniel's business logo. I closed the paper slowly, my heart caught somewhere between sorrow and justice. He'd done it to himself. Every forged signature, every whispered lie, it had all come back like a boomerang. When I got home that afternoon, there was a car parked in the driveway, Daniel's. I froze for a moment, then noticed he was sitting on the porch steps, head bowed, hands clasped. He looked smaller somehow, like the man who once filled every room with noise had been hollowed out. When he saw me, he stood quickly. "Mom, Daniel." He took a step closer, then stopped, uncertain. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't say anything, just gestured for him to sit. He sank down beside me on the porch swing, the one Richard built the summer before Daniel's 10th birthday. I lost everything he said after a while. "The business Sarah's parents, they've cut us off. She's staying with her mother for now." I nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. Consequences have a way of arriving right on time. He sighed, rubbing his face. "You were right. About everything. I thought if I could just get that house, we'd be safe. But all I did was destroy the one place that ever felt like home. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled through the leaves. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower buzzed faintly. Then I said softly, "Your father used to say there are two kinds of people, builders and takers. You can't be both." He looked at me, eyes glistening. "I don't want to be a taker anymore, I know. I want to fix things, Mom. I just don't know where to start." "Start by facing the truth," I said. "All of it. With the people you hurt, not just me." He nodded slowly. "I will." "And the baby?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Still coming. Sarah's due in a few months. I'll be there for the child no matter what happens between us." "Good," I said. "Then there's hope yet." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes but wants to. "Can I—" He hesitated. "Can I come by sometimes? Help around the house. Fix things like Dad used to." I studied him for a moment. The pride was gone, the arrogance replaced by something raw and human. "Yes," I said, finally. "But not to fix the house, Daniel. To fix yourself." He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. I let him cry. I didn't touch him, didn't speak, just let the sound of it fill the air that had been empty for too long. When he finally stood, he looked at me one last time. "You really forgive me?" I thought of Richard's note, the words etched in my memory. "Don't save him too early. Sometimes the fall is the lesson." "I forgive the son I raised," I said. "The man you were becoming. He'll have to earn that forgiveness." He nodded slowly, understanding, then walked to his truck. As the engine started, I whispered to the empty air, "Goodbye, Daniel. For now." After he left, I sat alone on the porch as the sun set, painting the house gold. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan waved, and I waved back, realizing something I hadn't before. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's what's left after you stop pretending it didn't hurt. That evening, Thomas called again. "The press wants a comment," he said. "You're something of a local legend now." I chuckled softly. "No comment. Let them tell whatever story they want. The truth's not for headlines, it's for those who need to hear it." He hesitated. "And Daniel." "He came by," I said. "He's finally learning the value of what he almost lost." "Good," Thomas said warmly. "You did what most people can't win without becoming bitter." "I didn't win," I said. "I just stopped losing." That night, I took out Richard's old letter again and read it under the lamp. The paper was worn now, soft at the folds. If Daniel ever forgets who he is, remind him. Not with anger, with truth. I smiled through tears. "You always knew, didn't you?" Outside, the wind picked up scattering leaves across the porch. The sound reminded me of the lake, that same soft rhythm of water meeting shore. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I kept the house Richard." Both of them. And somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear his laughter, carried by the wind, proud, relieved, eternal. The morning light came through the kitchen window like a soft blessing. It danced across the counters, touched the old clock, and rested on the stack of letters I'd never sent. I sat there, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, breathing in the quiet. It had been 3 months since the court case, and life had settled into something I hadn't felt in years, peaceful, unhurried, whole. Daniel still came by once a week. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he just fixed a leaky faucet or mowed the lawn. He didn't ask for anything anymore. He didn't need to. Every visit was apology enough. The first few times were awkward, two strangers pretending to be mother and son. But lately, it had started to feel easier. One Sunday, he even stayed for dinner. I made his favorite meatloaf and mashed potatoes the same way I did when he was 12 and thought ketchup was a food group. When he finished, he looked up and said softly, "Thanks, Mom." 2 words. Simple, honest, the kind that patch something invisible inside you. After he left, I sat on the porch swing, the night air cool and sweet, and realized that forgiveness doesn't always arrive with trumpets and tears. Sometimes it just slips in quietly, like a guest who knows where the spare key is. The suburban house had changed too. The rooms felt lighter, not because I'd redecorated, but because the heaviness was gone. I donated half the furniture to the church thrift store and replaced the curtains with ones that let more light in. For the first time in a decade, I could breathe inside my own walls. The Lake Shasta house remained untouched, its quiet beauty, waiting for me whenever I needed solitude. I spent a week there in November just to feel the air again. I painted the porch railings, cleaned the windows, and left fresh flowers on Richard's favorite windowsill. Standing there, overlooking the still water, I whispered, "You kept your promise." I was never powerless. He'd built that house as a sanctuary, but it had become something greater, a reminder that even when life strips you bare, there's always something you still own, your dignity. When I returned to Maplewood, I started volunteering at the community center. They had a program for seniors teaching financial literacy, how to protect your assets, your homes, your legacy. The first day, I stood in front of that small room of older faces. My voice trembled. I told them, "The world thinks once you reach a certain age, you become easy to push. But let me tell you something. I've seen storms come and go, and the trees that stand the longest aren't the tallest. They're the ones with roots deep enough to hold their ground." The applause that followed was soft, but it felt like sunlight. After the session, one woman lingered behind. Her eyes were tired but kind. "My daughter's been pressuring me to sell my house," she whispered. I didn't know what to do. "But hearing you today, maybe I'll fight a little longer." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "You should. You earned your life. No one else gets to rewrite it." That night, I walked home through the quiet streets of Maplewood. The air smelled like rain again, just like the day it all began. Lights flickered from inside warm houses, families laughing, arguing, living. It made me think of everything that had happened, all the pain and betrayal, but also the strange beauty that had grown from it. Because that's the thing about storms, they destroy, yes, but they also clear the air. When I reached my front door, I paused to look at the brass number plate. 117 Willow Street, my home, still mine, always mine. Inside, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan's grandchildren were playing on the sidewalk, their laughter echoing through the night. One of them waved at me, and I waved back, smiling. I thought about what I would say if someone asked me what I'd learned through all of this. Maybe I'd tell them this. You can lose almost everything, your husband, your health, even your child's respect, and still come out whole. Because being whole isn't about keeping what you own. It's about keeping who you are. Or maybe I'd just say, don't let anyone make you smaller than the life you built. Before heading to bed, I opened my old notebook, the one filled with dates, notes, and fragments of the fight, and turned to a clean page. I wrote 4 words at the top, "I am still here." Then for the first time, I didn't write for defense. I wrote for memory, about Richard's laughter, about Daniel's small steps toward redemption, about the kindness of strangers, a waitress, a lawyer, a neighbor who reminded me that goodness still exists even in the quiet corners of life. I didn't know if I'd ever publish it or if anyone would care to read it, but it didn't matter. It wasn't a story about loss anymore. It was a story about endurance. As I closed the notebook, I felt something inside me settle a peace, not built on victory, but on understanding. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of cedar and distant rain. I imagined Richard somewhere in that breeze, smiling, maybe proud. I whispered, "I did it, love. I kept the house. I kept myself." And for the first time in a long time, the silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was sacred.